And greetings. It is good to be back. My voice is not yet all the way back after 8 consecutive hours of broadcasting, but the rest of me is here. It is good to be back here. It's good to see the two of you. I am Steve Deace. Hello. Todd Erzin. Hello, Aaron McIntyre. I'd forgotten what you guys look like full body size. I've only seen you about this size in the camera there in Pat Gray's studio for the last week. So it is good to see each of you. It is good to see all of you as well. Good to see that we are brought to you by our friends over at Birch Gold. For those of us that have been holding our breath the last several months, we can exhale. And now work can finally get started on the major issues that this country is facing. One of the most significant ones, of course, is our national debt. That's something Elon Musk talked about a lot on the campaign trail. I know that is something that my good buddy, Congressman Chip Roy, is focused in on as well. So even though we're going to be heading in the right direction, the country's still broke, and that means the strategy remains the same. Diversify your savings. That's why you want to get gold from Birch Gold. So many things are out of control, even out of a president's control. So it's important to have a safe haven for those kinds of events, and Birch Gold Group will help you convert your IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news, it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket to get it started. So text Steve to do that at 989-898 and get your free info kit on gold. And right now through Black Friday, you'll receive a free 1-ounce Silver Eagle for every $5,000 purchased. Protect your savings with Birch Gold. Text Steve to 989-898 to claim your eligibility for the free silver today. Text Steve to 989-898. Coming up on today's show at the bottom of the hour, one of the interviews that left me the most gobsmacked we've done this year, that had amongst the biggest impacts on me, is when we talked to author and columnist from the Federalist, John Daniel Davidson. And he talked about what would happen. That's what his book is about. What was that, Todd? I think we had that conversation like March or April, so 7-8 months ago. And we discussed what would happen if there's not revival in America. And, I've said revival or bust on this show so many times over the years, but we've never gone necessarily into what would bust look like. He does. And he said, well, America would just become like Western Europe. It'd just become evil. It'd still be here, but it would just become evil. So, in the twilight of an election that gives us at least some form of optimism, I think a point that Daniel Horowitz made yesterday in the overtime, if you missed it, that Trump won such a resounding victory despite being underwater in his favorables still, now slightly. He's improved them quite a bit. He was underwater by well into double digits. Now it's 1 or 2 points. But still, you don't typically win a resounding victory like that. All right? What that tells you then is people overlooked quite a bit because of the agenda they wanted him to do. That's actually good news.
Yes.
That's where the mandate actually is. It wasn't, hey, we just, this was a killer troll, because there were, let's be honest, there were some killer trolls, and we enjoyed each and every one of them. Okay, but it really was, we need a massive policy redirection in this country.
It's
so in light of that,
thinking.
Yes, it is. It is, and we haven't had the opportunity to say that a lot the last few years. So in light of that, I want to get John Daniel Davidson's perspective on things now. And we'll do that coming up at the bottom of the hour. Theology Thursday, we will get into our study of Romans. We're going to start Romans chapter 6. And then I have had the time. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to with my travel schedule and everything else going on now after the election. But I did have the time to go back and do a reconciliation of the polling and this election cycle. Of course, the 2020 election cycle wrecked the public polling industry. It was historically bad. So how did it do in 2024? We will reconcile that for you coming up a little bit later on. But before we continue on, if you guys will indulge me here for a second, I have a point of order I would like to address for just a minute. All right. There has been a lot of talk in the last 36 hours or so about whether to show mercy, whether to unify with those who think we're Hitler and Nazis and fascists, whether or not to be magnanimous. Frankly, I thought President Trump's acceptance speech, victory speech on Tuesday night, I was impressed and shocked. I mean, if only because I could not have done it myself, let alone if I had been under everything he had been under. If you have any level of, if you have any T level at all, and you've gone through their attempts of your enemies to bankrupt you, to imprison you, to murder you. You have any T level at all, let alone, shall we say, the robust ego Mr. Trump has. Think that's a fair euphemism. Robust is a word, I think.
Target, yes.
It's a robust ego. Let alone if you have Mr. Trump's robust ego, any dude with any T level above Tampon Tim, how would you resist the temptation just to roll out their full Kumo D? How you like me now, right? How would you resist that? I mean, that's the ultimate vindication. You're like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, and how you like them apples, right? But he did actually talked a lot about the people, and we're going to get this country going again. It was frankly, even by Trump standards and almost any heterosexual male standards, pretty extraordinary restraint, I thought. But the conversation amongst those of us that have voted for him, and especially in the thought leader community, I love that term, even though frankly I think myself and almost none of us deserve it. But I like it nevertheless, so I'm going to claim it. But the conversation being had right now in the thought leader community is how to proceed moving forward. And I want to make sure I just make my position on this abundantly clear before we take power. To our leftist countrymen who are despondent at this moment in time over the coming Trumpian reign of terror, I want you to know there is no mercy. Mercy is for the weak. I offer you no words of comfort for your fear, no words to comfort you otherwise. In fact, I think your fear is legitimate. If anything, it's not pronounced enough. It's not palpable enough. I think you should prepare yourselves for a looming reckoning. We will have our vengeance in this life or the next. And it's going to look like the following. For your insolence, we will cut, maybe even slash your taxes, the cost of living, interest rates, and inflation. No mercy. For your disobedience, your borders will be secure. Mercy is for the weak. For all of your coercive tyranny, we will no longer allow unregulated biopharmaceutical industries to bombard you with inducing propaganda to take their experimental toxins. We will no longer force you to try to sound out the words on the back of everything you eat because you cannot pronounce them, let alone count the amount of ingredients on that can. We will go so far as to make you healthier against your will, as you tried to do to us. For your treachery, hear me and fear. We will deploy brigades of police, fully armed to the teeth, in fact, into your cities where you live. And they will begin rounding up. Indeed, they will begin rounding up all of the criminals unleashed in your blue cities and imprisoning them before they do you harm. And if you still have yet to learn what it means to obey, what it means to kneel before Zod, what it means to submit, then we will have no choice. None. And it will be your doing, not ours. You will have compelled us to act in the following way. We will go to your safe spaces, in the places where your women reside, in the places where your women are vulnerable. And we will take advantage of such situations as conquerors of old have done. And we will cleanse those spaces and impose our masculine patriarchal will in those spaces upon your women by making sure there are no bearded ladies, chicks with Adam apples, and dudes who belong in a padded cell creeping their spaces. And there will be no exceptions to this. None. You have been warned, and your time is at hand. And now here's Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by this.
Now I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, that's the sound of Democrats cheering on the peaceful transfer of power to literally Hitler. Kamala gave her concession speech at Howard University yesterday to a large crowd, including a tearful second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Kamala had called President-elect Trump earlier in the day to officially concede the race. It's looking like the final electoral college map will give Donald Trump 312 electoral college votes. As of this morning, Trump still has a margin of around 4 million in the popular vote. More on that in a little bit. In the Soviet wing of the Democrat Party, Vermont's Bernie Sanders came in hot with a post-mortem statement on the 2024 election saying, quote, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party, which has abandoned working class people, would find that the working class abandoned them. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they are right," end quote. Meanwhile, Kamala campaign co-chair Chris Coons went on CNN and blamed voters, saying they're too stupid to realize how much the Biden-Harris administration did for them.
From what I was seeing and what I was hearing, a big focus on the economy and inflation, and frankly, a lot of folks not recognizing the real progress that was made by President Biden and Vice President Harris.
And now the most under-talked about story coming out of the election. Apparently since 2020, between 10 to 13 million Democrat voters either vaporized, were exiled to the phantom zone, or were raptured. We're told Biden had 81 million votes back in 2020. Kamala is sitting at around 68 million votes, which is more in the vicinity of where Hillary Clinton ended up in 2016. And then there's this. This is a graph of 17 bellwether counties across the United States. In 2016, Donald Trump won all of them and won the election. In 2020, Trump won all but one of them and lost the election. And in 2024, Trump won all but two of them and won the election.
Man, it's a mystery. It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma.
And finally, this ex-post from the account Gaze Windward, who was responding to a lefty demanding a recount of the election. Quote, "Well, I suppose you could try to make a case in court, but since the states haven't certified their elections, it might be difficult to establish standing. After the certification, you might have standing, but unfortunately a court cannot overrule an act of the legislature. You could potentially try to gather a slate of alternate electors, but the Congress is under no obligation to accept them. At that point, you'd probably have to appeal to the Supreme Court, but that's tough since they don't want to be in the business of deciding elections. Then all that's really left is good old-fashioned right of assembly for redress of grievances like a march. January 6th is when the vice president certifies the election officially, so that's probably the time you want to aim to achieve maximum public impact. Good luck. And that's what happened while we were away. And how could I forget one more thing? Jack Smith is winding down his cases against Trump as we speak. After all of that, after all of the Biden-Harris lawfare from the Department of Justice, it ends with a whimper.
We will address that here in a moment. But first, Aaron's montage brought to you by our friends at Constitution Wealth, who are every bit as ecstatic about this being Victory Thursday as you are. Nevertheless, now, we cannot rest. And that's going to be a big focus of our show here moving forward. We have to take advantage of this. We have to. If we don't, well, we have to. We just have to take advantage of this. All right, so I've got a question for you. Are you ready to secure the future of American values for generations to come? Do you know if your investments are aligned with the renewed promises now for our great nation? Well, we've turned a corner, but the work does not stop there. So don't let your retirement dollars support the very causes that have threatened our freedoms. Now's the time to use your shareholder proxy votes to keep woke companies accountable and ensure your investments match your principles. Most people don't realize they can do that and make a difference. Mutual funds, ETFs often vote on your behalf, but that doesn't mean you can't take control. So let's keep pushing forward, partnering with investment experts who share your values. You can continue shaping the future by reducing the hold that the woke schemes of ESG and DEI and more have on your financial portfolio. So let Constitution Wealth be your ally, helping you provide everything we stand for. Take action now. Visit constitutionwealth.com/blaze and sign up for a free consultation today. That's constitutionwealth.com/blaze. All right, let's get to it. In fact, let's start back to front right there with Aaron, what Aaron mentioned at the end. Let's reset a question we asked quite a bit during the scamdemic and its aftermath. So, in light of Trump's victory, the Department of Justice is winding down its investigations, you know, the ones that were just so paramount that just days before the election, they had to get an emergency order in order to make sure to leak the evidence that they had against Trump that they could not get to trial before the election took place. That's how paramount the cause was, Todd.
Yes.
That's how important these crimes against our sacred democracy, that's how perilous the events were. That we had to go ahead and take the extraordinary step of letting the public see the evidence against a defendant before a jury does. We had to do that, Todd.
Yes.
Yes. And then the election happens. It doesn't go their way. And now there's a press release with agate type print. We are winding down our investigations here.
Yeah. There's a lot of
what is the
out.
benign, innocent explanation for that, Mr. Erskine?
Same tone from President Biden when he spoke this morning about, accepting the verdict of our democracy. There's a lot of, my bad, Mr. Hitler. Let's move on.
It's disgusting. Don't fall for the rosy language that they're using. Both Biden this morning and Kamala in her speech yesterday. Don't fall for it. These people are just psychopaths. I mean, he just called half of the country garbage, and now he's calling for us to, we got to lock hands, sing Kumbaya around the fire. I mean, she just got done with 2 weeks of literally Hitler again, and, we got to, don't fall for that. No, press the advantage now.
I need to echo your point, and it's why I hammer so much about, sports pros, etc. The passive election day is one day. You got it right, folks. But as Steve said, there is work to do. And it's incumbent upon all of us as citizens not just to trust the experts, pass it off to people. We must become citizens in an entirely new way for us, but it is just the old way, the way it was always intended. Stand a post. We the people. We must.
Aaron, since you mentioned in your montage what you thought was the most under-talked about story coming out of Tuesday, can I throw in a nomination for the most under-talked about too? A lot was said, particularly on our show, just analyzing this election, that one of the unquantifiable X factors was going to be the decision that the Trump campaign made to outsource its get out the vote effort to these various third-party groups around the country. One of them, Elon Musk's group, and there were some subsidiaries to that. Turning Point USA was another, and there were a couple of others as well. But those were the two high-profile names, just because Charlie Kirk at TPUSA is somebody who has a pretty large following, and of course, Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, and probably therefore has the largest following in the world too, as the owner of Twitter, right? And we all discussed, we had no idea how they were going to do. It would be hard to be more mediocre than what the traditional Republican Party get out the vote apparatus has provided. It'd be hard to be more mediocre than that. But at least that was like a baseline, right? You know, I mean, that would at least be a baseline. That doesn't mean you could do worse than that. You know, you could also do better, but they were up against, shall we call it a legendary turnout machine. Like, did you see Clark County in Nevada just overnight had to get one more in? They had to get one more in. Late mail-in drop off this morning, and
Wouldn't
now,
you know?
when you know, there's just not going to be enough votes for that Republican Brown out there to win that Senate seat after all. Okay, I'm just telling you right now, if you have mass mail-in voting, you don't have a secure election system.
Correct.
I don't care who wins, what the result is, you just do not. You just don't have that. All right, you just don't. That notwithstanding, though, it is the system that we have, so we have to work within its confines to some degree. I was one of the few people that looked at the off-year and special election cycle for the last 2 years and the data, and we got destroyed on the right. Destroyed. Democrats dominated the off-year and the special election cycles from December 2022 until this election day. They dominated. And if you go back and you look at the demographics of those races or the polling in those races, on average was at 9 points, I believe, that they were overperforming there, which, and then we saw in Iowa, we had a caucus. Maybe it wasn't perceived nationally to be competitive, but a lot of attention here locally and money locally was invested here. So Iowans, at least, were involved in the process. We had 14% turnout. And we're looking at this and thinking, oh boy. Gallup came out with the poll that showed there was a massive enthusiasm gap between Democrats and Republicans. I think that was in early October, somewhere around there, right? And now we're going up against, they might be 5-star recruits. We don't know, but they're freshmen, even if they are, going up against veterans here that have done all this before. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, boy, howdy. I mean, one of my best friends in politics texted me the night before the election, just analyzing the trends, and he's good at that. And he texted me the night before the election, said, I'd be way more confident if I thought we had a professional get out the vote effort, because the energy is there, Now, one more thing. I think we all know, we discussed this too, that if Trump had lost, he was not going to say, I could have done better, right? And so if you're big names like Elon Musk and Charlie Kirk, if he loses, he's blaming you, right? You're going to get part of the blame. Your groups didn't do their job. Your groups did not deliver, right? So I think we would be remiss if I didn't take a few minutes then, since I talked frequently about this on this show and on other shows I was on, as one of the X factors of this election. Put your name out there like those guys did, and your what is on the line, right? Okay. And you deliver, give them some flowers. Give them their propers. They delivered. And you could see the organizational strength in the early voting. The early voting numbers were way beyond any level of energy we have displayed on the right in the last 2 years. Not even close. Way beyond that. Okay? And you have to think too, they're rookies. This is the first time they've done this. They probably made a bunch of mistakes, probably learned from some stuff. And sure, the energy that a Donald Trump can produce can cover up some of that, like when you have a great quarterback, right? But eventually, if your offensive line sucks, I don't care if you got Peyton Manning, the other team's defense, they're going to find the hole and exploit it, right? You have to think that these kinds of groups now, based on what they built and learned from this, are only going to get better at it from here. And I just wanted to make sure we took a few minutes here on the show today, because we did talk about it. We were one of the few shows that, made it one of the key parts of our election analysis. So they delivered, and I think we should make sure they took the risk. Yeah, well, Steve, that's the thing. This is what you don't understand if you've not worked in politics. The better funded you are, the riskier it is for you, because the expectation is you had the resources. If you suck and fail, then whose fault is it? Yours. All right. So, this is going to be a model moving forward. This is how things will be done moving forward. And the amount of prestige and clout and significance that those guys and those groups, who knows if Elon Musk will want to stick around long term politically. This might just be a chapter for him to try to stop America from becoming California. That was his concern, of one-party system where everything just moves left at a breakneck pace and there's no dissonance at all. He may eventually say, hey, I did my thing. I funded you guys. You take it from here. I'm going to go to Mars. He might do that. In fact, I think there's probably a pretty decent chance he might do that. Okay. But for people like Kirk and others who were involved in this is their career. And as they say in the mob, they made their bones in this election. So I think we need to recognize that. Yeah,
well, it might be a little counterintuitive, but the main reason they were ultimately successful, or people around them or before them failed, they just cared about results. This is what, going to Amish country, highlighting the fact that they were mad about a specific thing, raw milk, understanding not only do you capture them, it might not be a ton of votes, but it's votes in close elections. And then you also have a narrative that you can show other people of them waking up. See, this is where a lot of people in this business, and Steve knows this as well as anybody, and this is why bureaucracies ultimately don't solve problems. They just maintain problems to exist. Same thing with conservative Republican consultants. It just becomes a job. Mm-hmm. They're not really trying to solve the Rubik's Cube anymore. That's a problem.
That's the key thing. It is a job. We do need to treat it professionally. But in politics, if it's just a job, all right, then it's about a process than principles. Yes. Then I'm just selling widgets. It's not necessarily something I actually believe in. That's a key there. Yes. Absolutely.
I mean, are we talking about door knocking, chasing votes, that type of thing?
All of that stuff,
yeah,
yes.
I'm not totally sure if we'll know right off the bat how much that actually impacted, because there's still this debate in my mind, and I've seen it on X as well. How much does the air war matter versus the door knocking? And I'm still skeptical about the latter in this day and age. Regardless, Todd's point at the end stands there. I don't know if you've seen this, but they're $20 million in debt, the Kamala campaign, after this campaign. Mm-hmm. $20 million in debt. See, this is what happens. This happened to them on the other side. They raised $1 billion, and they just spent it all. I'm seeing a lot of finger pointing over there, saying that a lot of their advisors, a lot of their analysts, a lot of their campaigners didn't really treat this as anything other than a big old cash cow grift. So that's what their experience. I'm starting to see some echoes of what we complained about a decade and a half, 2 decades ago with the Republican Party. I'm seeing that over there now. They're starting to deal with that same dynamic where they're really just beholden to a large group of donors, which that happens over here as well. I think it's different now with Donald Trump. He's outside of kind of that dynamic. But I'm seeing a lot of the echoes of things that we've complained about with Republicans over on their side.
And really quick, too, who knows how much Scott Pressler driving around Pennsylvania in his Honda. I don't know what car he drives. I just like that as a word picture. Who knows? I do know, following him on Twitter, the dude must have tweeted from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, 47,000 times the last couple of years, okay? And my understanding is this is the first time Bucks County, Pennsylvania has ever gone Republican, even in elections that Republicans have won there in Pennsylvania, in a presidential election. So, Aaron, you're correct. There's no way to quantify how much it helped. No way to, but we can clearly quantify that it did not hurt, right?
Right.
It's one of those things in terms of, and I think some of it is living in Iowa and seeing how much DeSantis' people put into this and how little it worked for them. Maybe we're kind of also overstating the lack of importance of this moving forward. All right, but ultimately, how much does grassroots organization matter? It's a little bit like the famous Supreme Court case, Kentucky versus Sanford, on obscenity. Yeah, when and I think it was Justice Potter who said, I can't define obscenity, but I know what it is when I see it, right? Like I can't quantify how much what Charlie, Elon, and these groups did. I can't quantify what they did, but I just know what it is when I see it. When I see the amount of early voting that was done by Republicans in this cycle, given the energy level that existed within the Republican Party before these groups went to work, it's quantifiable generally, I think, even if not specifically. All right, we'll come back. John Daniel Davidson's going to join us here next. Stay tuned. We are very proud of our partnership here on The Blaze with Preborn. We have partnered with them because of your generosity. Our show, several shows across the network over the last couple of years, to save tens of thousands of babies. In the history of its ministry, Preborn has saved hundreds of thousands of babies. And it's because they're out there on the streets, building clinics, meeting moms who are thinking of considering the murder of their children. They practice the biblical standard of argumentation, truth and grace. That's how persuasion happens in a biblical worldview. And they confront moms with the truth. Maybe it's certainly in a gentler approach than my level of confrontation typically is. But when you go to a mom who is saying, hey, and her conscience is telling her that's not a person, it's an unviable tissue mass, it's a blob, etc. Don't worry about it. Go ahead and kill it. They have her listen to that heartbeat. And it's not hers. So they confront her conscience. And then when mom chooses not to murder her child, they're there with grace. They offer up to 2 years worth of support, counseling, prenatal, postnatal care, car seats, diapers, formula, etc. All of these things they do for mom and baby, they do for free, but none of them are actually free. And that's where you and I come in. If you want to make a tax-deductible donation today, what are the chances you could spend just $28 and save a life right now, today, in the United States of America, anywhere else? Not high, but that's what an ultrasound costs today. You can give more. That's great too. Make that donation today. Preborn.com/Steve. That's preborn.com/Steve. Or you can dial #250 on your mobile phone and say the keyword baby, or just go to preborn.com/Steve. Well, you might recall the name of his book from earlier this year when we had him on last, Pagan America, The Decline of Christianity and the Dark Age to Come. Senior editor at the Federalist, John Daniel Davidson, joins us now. John, it's good to have you back on the show, man. How are you?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me.
So I got to tell you, I don't say this about a lot of interviews that we do, but the interview we did with you back, I think, in March or April, it wrecked me. I mean, even though I've been a revival or bust guy for almost a decade now in terms of the ultimate fate of American culture, but to have you quantify on our show what bust would look like, because a lot of times you think, well, your country goes bankrupt, it's conquered, and you're like, no, we'll just do what Western Europe. We'll just be a richer version of Western Europe. We'll just become evil.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me throughout the rest of this year, which is why I am really curious to get your perspective on the aftermath of this election and the resounding verdict. And let me tell you something that might be amongst the most encouraging things of all the data out there, because I've seen you've poured over some of the data as I have. But the fact that Trump's favorables, he's improved them, but he's still underwater overall. And here's why I think that's a very big deal, because it indicates groups that don't traditionally vote our way, non-college whites who voted overwhelmingly for us, Latinos who gave him the most support they've ever given a Republican, etc. They weren't voting for our killer memes. And now we do have some killer memes, if I do say so myself, but they just were looking at policies and saying, we need the agenda that you guys are talking about, and we need you to actually do it this time. Okay? So I found that to be very encouraging as well. But where are you at right now?
Yeah, I find it very encouraging as well for all the reasons that you mentioned, making gains among all these demographic groups that traditionally have not voted for Republicans. The Republican tent is now under Trump is bigger than it's ever been before. All the trend lines point in the right direction. And those are reasons to be optimistic about the immediate future. I still don't think it changes sort of my position that I articulated to you back in April, which is that, and I mentioned this in the book too, that politics isn't going to save us ultimately. Trump isn't going to save us. We've bought some time, but that time is very valuable, and we need to use it to reconvert the half or more than half of the country that are no longer, I would say, Americans in any meaningful sense. They don't like the idea of America. They don't like the ideals and principles and way of life that has characterized this country for most of our history. We've got to bring those people back. We have to convert them and then sort of stage a counter revolution, right? Because, one election win doesn't reverse decades and decades and generations of what amounts to an anti-American revolution in this country. And that's what drove the Kamala Harris campaign, and that's what's driving the opposition to Trump all across this country. So a lot of reason for optimism. We've bought ourselves a little bit of time, and we need to use it wisely. Do
you believe we are prepared? Now, let me define the we this time. On on an organizational apparatus level, do you believe the right is prepared to do that? Do you think so in our current state right now?
No, not at all. And part of the reason is that the right is still stuck in an old mode of engagement. And by the right, I'm talking about sort of donors, where the money comes from. In a lot of our operations, it goes to outmoded ways of communicating or trying to influence policy or influence the culture. Where is the conservative New York Times, right? We should have news operations that are as large and as well funded as the New York Times, and we don't have that. We should have media enterprises that are churning out blockbuster movies and TV series, they're telling all the stories that are compelling stories that people actually want to watch and engage with, that Hollywood just isn't doing. Where are those production? The Daily Wire can't do everything, right? And they're a little bit hit or miss on a lot of their culture stuff. So no, I think that we're not prepared for the task at hand, and the message, I think, has not gotten through it. And unfortunately, and I hate to say this in like the moment of victory, but I think that the Trump win here, and such a decisive win, may have the effect of causing people to maybe relax on their laurels and kind of breathe a sigh of relief and be like, oh, okay, now everything's fine now. Mm-hmm. No, everything's not fine. And we have to work harder than ever now.
Yeah, I know a thing or two about trying to bring original content to mainstream platforms, and how difficult that can be for our worldview to do. And I also know a thing or two about how laissez-faire a lot of our donor class is about that kind of stuff. And a lot of our donor class really is fixated on believing that, I mean, hey, we need to fund the political cause, but that somehow that's where almost all of their attention is on 24/7 is on that, as opposed to understanding how do we seed the ground from where from where multiple generations of those kinds of leaders are going to come from.
Yeah, and the culture right now is ripe for a massive offensive from the right. You can see, it's not just politics, and it's not just online meme culture, like the collapse of Disney's Star Wars properties. Right. Just shows, for example, there's no appetite for that, but there is an appetite for like Maverick, Top Gun style blockbuster movies. That was like the biggest movie that's come out in the last 5 years, and it was basically anti-woke Americana classic. Classic stuff. That there's a hunger for that, I think, among the American people that's totally untapped, and the people that could make that happen on the right, it's really almost not even on their radar, and that's unfortunate, because, as I said, we've got a window here, and we need to be aggressive. And we need, we need to advance on all fronts, not just the political front, as important as that is.
You've got a piece out in the Federalist today. Let's just go right to the headline. After Trump's victory, there can be no unity without a reckoning. What's the reckoning you want us to have, John?
Yeah, the temptation here is to be like, all right, well, the election's over and we're all Americans after all, and so let's just let bygones be bygones. It doesn't work like that. Not after what the left did, not after what the corporate media did, not after what the deep state and the Democrats did. We can have no real unity without honesty, without accountability, and without consequences for the people that perpetrated what has happened over the last 4 years. And I'm not just talking about what they perpetrated during COVID. I'm talking about the deep state lawfare against Trump, for example, the collusion of our institutions and our agencies in the federal bureaucracy, the FBI, the intelligence community, the corruption at the Department of Justice. They're talking about dismissing these Jack Smith cases. Well, that's great, but Jack Smith shouldn't be allowed to just walk away scot-free for what he's done, for what the others at the Department of Justice have done to weaponize the Justice Department against Trump. There's got to be accountability for that. And if there's not accountability for that, we're never going to have unity. And that goes for, in a formal way, those agencies and government institutions that have done wrong. But it also goes in an informal way for the corporate media and what they perpetrated and how they've divided the country. That's not necessarily a crime, but CBS News should broken up and sold off for parts. They should lose their readers, their viewers, their advertisers. And that goes for most of the corporate media and their behavior over the past 4 years.
A lot of the zeitgeist stuff that you're describing here actually is beyond the purview of a presidential administration, no matter how effective it is, and actually requires a pre-existent or at least a terraforming in the moment movement on multiple levels. Committees of correspondence during the Revolutionary era. This requires more of a multi-tentacled entity than just in the Trump presidency we trust.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think there's, as I said, there's the formal and the informal. We have seen in this election cycle the role that alternative or non-corporate or right of center or just independent media have played, from Matt Taibbi's Twitter files to shows like yours, to the role that Elon Musk played in acquiring Twitter, to podcasts like Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's interview with Trump had more traffic in a few days than all of the cable news stations. There's something like 40 million people on YouTube watch that. So those things are breaking corporate media, and corporate media deserves to be broken. And as I said in the piece, if Lauren Powell Jobs wants to run The Atlantic as a vanity project, fine. But nobody should ever seriously take the idea that The Atlantic is a journalistic enterprise. It's a propaganda enterprise. It's a left-wing activist enterprise, and that's true for all of these corporate media organizations. They have been shown to be totally out of touch, totally compromised, willing to say anything, to knowingly lie to the American people, to disparage half the country day in and day out. And no one should ever take them seriously again. They know nothing, and much that they know is not so. And so, yeah, you're right. It's a multi-tentacled thing. Those audiences are collapsing, and I think we shouldn't just walk away from them, but anything that we can do to hasten their collapse should be encouraged. FCC violations, breaking the law, with colluding with the deep state. Anything that we can do to hasten the collapse of these institutions, we should do.
Final question for you. I got about 2 minutes here, John. If you had 5 minutes with Donald Trump one-on-one, and he said, John, what would you have me do here for the next 4 years? Your answer would be what?
The only thing that matters, if he does nothing else in the next 4 years except go to war with and dismantle the deep state, that's what he should do. The FBI and the Department of Justice have to be dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. The intelligence agencies wage war on the American people every day. They have to be dismantled and reconfigured. There's nothing more important than dismantling the deep state. All of these federal agencies, thousands and thousands of federal bureaucrats should be fired. That is the number one. The deep state that went to war against Trump in 2016 before he even won the election and before he ever took office, and that has not stopped warring with him, that has to be destroyed. And that should be the sole focus of his administration.
Fantastic stuff, John. Read his piece over at the Federalist today. After Trump's victory, there can be no unity without a reckoning. Get his outstanding book as well, Pagan America. Good to have you back, John. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. All right, guys, what do you think?
This is exactly what I was talking about at the top of the show. Don't fall for the rosiness of the speeches from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Okay, he just called you garbage, like yesterday. Kamala Harris spent the last, the last Deace group before the election, I noted that small but subtle and nefarious change in pronouns. They're going from calling Trump literally Hitler to say they're using he. Now them, they. They're talking about all the rest of us. There has to be a reckoning. There's no kumbaya moment here. And they're making it clear, unlike in 2016, they're making it clear, at least their apparatchiks in the media, down to the granular level. And boy, howdy, do I see it on my Facebook friends' timelines right now. They're making it clear they don't want unity with you. So don't make the mistake of thinking that we're all just going to sing Kumbaya around the campfire. No, they have no intentions still. There will be of living peaceably with you. They have no machinations whatsoever of any introspection. Press the advantage while you have the window of opportunity.
Well, I hope that John's got more than 5 minutes on his hands, because Donald Trump needs to call people like John and say, you're hired. Along with you're fired, the counter to that is you're hired.
Yeah, what replaces it? Yeah.
People with if that level of self-awareness that Donald Trump must have about what he said there, they were coming after you before you even entered the White House in 2016. You need people with the appetite of John Daniel Davidson to go in there and be part of your team. You can't do it by yourself. There's just too much to do.
Now, the last time a president talked in the manner that you guys are recommending, he ended up in the middle of a turkey shoot in Dealey Plaza. Okay? So now, in this case, Trump's already faced a couple of those situations already. So I don't know. Do you think that shakes someone's resolve or steals it, or does it maybe work on a case-by-case basis, perhaps?
The man said, fight, 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 right after he got shot. I'm taking him at his word.
That's a good point. You agree or disagree with that, Aaron?
I have no reason at this point to think that Donald Trump hasn't learned any lessons. From the rumblings that I'm seeing online already, this transition is already well underway. We're not. If I had to bet right now, who was it that wrote at, was it Tablet or maybe American Greatness in the immediate aftermath back in 2020 about how for a period of 2 weeks, Washington really was afraid. Mm-hmm. They were afraid of Donald Trump.
Angelo Codevilla, before he passed away, wrote that piece.
Thank you. They were afraid of Donald Trump.
What is Trump to us, I think is what it was called.
Exactly. And we did an entire show on that piece, I think. But they were afraid. But then it became apparent that Donald Trump didn't really know what he was doing. And he came from business. He was a New York guy, as he said recently, not a Washington guy. I have no reason to think this time that he has not learned lessons. And that is a very, I don't want to say pleasant surprise, because that makes it sound condescending. But that's a really, really optimistic signal to me.
All right, we'll come back hour 2, and we'll have some Theology Thursday. We'll continue our study of Romans next. Back here with hour 2 on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace with Aaron McIntyre and Todd Erzin. Let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can email us, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow me at Steve Deace Show on X or Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Don't forget to subscribe, I should say. Easy for me to say, not. Subscribe to our new YouTube channel, at Deace Show on YouTube. That's at Deace Show on YouTube. And thank you to all of you. Keep that going. It's amazing what happens when you're not being censored. We are drawing as many views on a YouTube channel we just launched weeks ago that has 10% of the subscriber base, our old one does, and we're getting just as many views on our clips there as we did on the old page that got censored so many times. It's amazing what happens when you're not being censored. So keep that going, at Deace Show on YouTube. Also, keep those 5-star reviews going. We appreciate all of those. And if you've yet to send one for us and you would consider doing it today, we'd appreciate that too. You can also hit subscribe or follow if you're on iTunes. And that way, every time we do a new episode, it'll be right there in your podcast feed every single time. And this part of the show brought to you by our friends over at Jase Medical. You know, we're talking about taking advantage of the moment. Well, take advantage of the moment right now. Make sure that you've got backups of existing medications. You know what? Let me throw something out there, and I'm going to put it in the ether in the hopes that by vocalizing this, it won't happen. But, I mean, RFK Jr., I'm told, has basically just been living at Mar-a-Lago and is already into the vetting process for a Trump administration on health policy. Okay? I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. We watched the Biden administration ration monoclonal antibodies during the COVID summer wave of the Sunbelt states. Remember that? We watched them do that in the summer of 2021 to set the stage for the jab mandates to come. We watched government, media, big pharma, industrial complex take a drug it gave Nobel Prizes to and work so hard to label it as poisonous and dangerous and horse paste, it filtered down to NFL pregame shows when Aaron Rodgers said he was taking it. That's how much the misinformation, the propaganda metastasized. Hydroxychloroquine has been given to people since the 60s. We have given literally millions of people that drug all over the world, and suddenly you just can't do that anymore. The treatment they gave us instead was a failed cancer drug with a black box warning that didn't work, and the only thing that it actually did was cause kidney failure. Everything I'm saying happened, correct? This all happened. Well, in light of Trump, to the point that Trump even mentioned RFK Jr. is going to be given healthcare policy control at his victory speech Tuesday night. Unprompted, he mentioned it. Don't you think those same people might say, that doxycycline and amoxicillin, those antibiotics you have been taking for 80 years and have saved how many lives? On second thought, if you guys don't want to take all this new experimental stuff that would make us billions and billions of dollars for you to take, and you want to ban our ads, which are 10-second messaging and then 27-second disclaimers, okay? You want to do all that kind of stuff. We've got some new safety testing, and guess what, guys? Penicillin's bad. Guess what, guys? Oh, man, you won't believe this. After all these years, it turns out the 5-6 most important antibiotics ever discovered in human history, they don't work, guys. They don't work anymore. You got to take this new stuff now. You see what I'm going with this? You think they're just going to sit there over there? You think they're just going to sit there and have no response at all to RFK Jr. shattering the pharmaceutical industrial complex into 1,000 pieces? They're just going to sit there and take it? I don't think that. I think they're going to try to take it out on us. That's what I think. Is that crazy?
It's me you're talking to.
Aaron, is that crazy?
No.
So make sure you're prepared for that now. Get your Jase case right now from Jase Medical that has things like amoxicillin, neighbor to penicillin, and doxycycline and more. You can also expand it to drugs like the previously mentioned and refer to ivermectin, in case you need a customizable option for the drugs that you need to make sure you or a loved one has on tap. And get that peace of mind right now. You never know when that could never happen here. Happens here. All right. So this is what you want to do. Go to jase.com, Jase, jase.com/Deace, jase.com/Deace. Use the code Deace at checkout for a discount on your order at jase.com/Deace. Code Deace for the discount. Okay. I've decided that we are probably going to end up spending the entire block of time we have today on verse 1 of chapter 6.
Good.
Because of the implications of what is said here. All right? So let us continue our study of Romans. We've been doing this verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We are going to begin Romans chapter 6 here this week. All right? And so Paul has gone to great lengths up until this point in time to define what it means that the righteous shall live by faith, the just shall live by faith. We are saved by faith. What does that mean? Is it faith alone? We got into all those debates, all right? All right, but on some level, both Catholics and Protestants agree we are justified by faith. The question is it faith alone, and then how is that faith demonstrated? But we're not going to settle a 500-year-old argument here, so at some point we just have to acknowledge we're going to agree and disagree and move on, all right? But now the argument turns. Okay? Because at the time that the New Testament was being written, as we've mentioned to you before, other than non-Messianic Jews and who didn't believe Yeshua was Messiah, and Rome, who thought there was no king but Caesar, the greatest threat to the early church, as we told you before, is what's referred to as Gnosticism. And it's from the Greek word gnosis, which means hidden or secret or special language. Or knowledge, I mean. And And the idea that goes right back to original sin. Did God really say? Okay. So they even wrote their own alternative gospels. They had some crazy theories about things. Okay. But there was another aspect to Gnosticism too that is really important, in particular for the culture in which we live today. They taught a form of duality. That the spirit, what you did spiritually and with the body were separated, bifurcated from one another. And that the body was dirty. And that it didn't really have any great value. And so therefore, you could just kind of do what you want with it. Just use it if you wanted to. Engage in orgies, literally. It's at best, it's an obstacle to truly having the Greek life of study and philosophy and contemplation. At best, it gets in the way of focusing on that which the Greek life held in high esteem. So at best, you either have to, avoid it and become almost monkish, or at worst, then just go ahead and indulge those appetites. And then when you're satiated, when the body is satiated, you can come back and go back to the contemplative life of the Greek, right? Okay? This kind of bifurcation of the body and the soul and the spirit. Well, Christianity comes along and says that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. We are body, soul, mind, and spirit, interconnected, made in the image of God, who himself is a spirit, the Holy Spirit, is himself spirit as the Father, and then takes on flesh, incarnate, the body. When John introduces the term Antichrist into the New Testament for the first time towards the end of it, he will say Antichrist are those who deny the incarnation. Those who deny that Christ came, God came in the flesh, are the Antichrists. To deny the incarnation, okay? And so Gnosticism comes along and just completely challenges all of that. And especially in a very lascivious Greek culture that was very sensual and sexual anyway, those temptations pre-existed. You would have that as a Christian living in Greek-influenced, Greco-Roman-influenced culture anyway, before someone comes along and offers now a theological framework to justify that. Much of what I'm talking about, by the way, is heavily influenced a best-selling author, one of the best-selling fiction authors of this era. Some of you know the name. His name is Dan Brown. And essentially everything that Dan Brown has done with his books on his mystery fiction books is just rework Gnosticism, Gnostic heresies into claims of fiction and archaeology, but they're fictional. That's all that it is. It's just rewarmed Gnosticism. And so this is the great threat, right? So now Paul is going to tilt to the other side of this argument, right? And it transitions here with this statement, verse 1. What shall we say then? Are we to continue to sin? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? There's a fancy theological term here known as antinomianism. Just a stained glass window term for now that we're saved, we can live any way we want. We can just basically test God. We're good. We can live any way that we want to live now. Bonhoeffer referred to this as cheap grace. And that's what I want us to address here in this conversation today. Because some of the tension that we discussed from the Catholic and Protestant perspective, and I didn't realize this until last week, guys, the fortuitous timing, we had no idea when we got to Reformation Day and Halloween. We didn't know when we started this in late March. We had no idea how long this was going to take us. Right? Mm-hmm. We don't have like we don't have a sermon plan here. All right, we're doing these verses. We're just however organically long we think it takes. And it just so happened that when we get to a lot of the faith and works debate, chapters 4 and 5 in particular, when we get to a lot of that debate, it just so happens a lot of that was leading right into the fall and right into the Reformation, right? Which is why we paused last week and discussed a lot of that. That was kind of a unit wrap-up of all the conversations we had just had, okay? But some of that debate, when it's not about ecclesiastical authority, but legitimate theological disagreement, stems from the concern Paul says right here in verse 1 of chapter 6. There has to be some form of framework here. Something must exist. We can't just go out now and disabuse the grace we've been given. Something has to exist. There needs to be some systematic theology that helps us to put nuts and bolts on what it means to work out our salvation in fear and trembling, because we still have this flesh on us. It's still temptable. And so there has to be some framework or metric by which we don't just say, thank you, Jesus, and off to the temple of Aphrodite I go until I'm satiated and spent, and then we'll see if there's any left over for the wife when I get home. I mean, there's got to be something between these two things, right? And this is the other challenge that is occurring in this culture now. Is it okay to just live any way that we want to live? Given all the pressures, okay, Rome wants us to say Jesus is not Lord. The Greek culture around us wants to partake and be a part of it. We're bringing Gentiles into the church now. We mentioned at the very beginning of this study that Rome was the first truly diverse enclave of worship of the God of the Bible, Jews and Gentiles together en masse in an urban setting that existed in all of human history. Up until this point, they've been separated for the most part. And now they're going to worship together. And now we're going to go actually to minister to the uncircumcised now. We're going to go to these other outer rims of the Roman Empire and that couldn't even spell, Sabbath, let alone has ever taken one. And now we're going to bring in all kinds of people with funky moral practices and ethics from their culture. And we're going to, Paul's going to talk in a few chapters about Christians being grafted in with Jews. Well, now we're going to also graft in Gentiles as well that have a lot different moral foundation and network and ethos than the typical Jewish argument over Yeshua that had dominated Christianity up until this point. So let's pause right there and find out what each of your respective tour guides have to say about that verse alone.
Well, I never plan out how I'm going to start on this because I think it's important that it's organic. We go where the Spirit takes us, and I want to find out how Steve sets the table. And Scott Hahn and Steve are exactly over the target in terms of we need to deal with and this is really an important point about reading Scripture, and as I've said in the past, how self-evident is this? But Paul himself understands, after all he's done for 5 chapters, that there's going to be obvious misunderstandings, which Scott Hahn talks about. He says, after setting that table for 5 chapters, Paul now examines the liturgical context of justification as well as the ethical obligations that arise from it. Sacramental transformation leads to moral transformation. In baptism, we are plunged into the saving death of the Messiah, raised to new life in his resurrection, and set on a path towards ongoing sanctification. Clearly, Paul is concerned that his remarks in Romans 5 can lead to mistaken inferences. This is such an important point for people who, anybody moving forward in terms of reading Scripture. And he wants to head off those potential misunderstandings. He assumes also that readers are not unaware of what he is talking about in this context, because he expects they have had, when he talks about you are not unaware, he says a verse later, of what I'm talking about. He expects they have had sufficient instruction in the faith to follow his reasoning. We're pointing out that there is a life outside of this letter of Romans that people have already been exposed to as Christians.
So R.C. Sproul gets a little spicy here. I'll read a few excerpts. Paul knows, talking about verse 1, Paul knows how sinful people think. He's just given the argument that where sin abounds, grace much more abounds. So the logic seems simple. If we want more grace, then we should commit more sin. Therefore, he says, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? He asks the question rhetorically, This supplies the answer. We cannot miss the impact it makes. Certainly not. Sproul says, my translation, the New King James, is weak here. Some translations are even weaker, supplying simply no. He says his favorite translation is this from the ASV. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. In other words, we must not even think about it. Paul is not simply expressing a denial of that premise. The force of his language signals apostolic abhorrence. Paul would be appalled if he heard any true Christian say, if I keep getting grace where I sin, I'm just going to keep on sinning that grace may abound. God forbid. At the time of the Reformation in the 16th century, Luther was charged with antinomianism. Anti means against, opposed to, and nomos is the Greek word for law. Antinomian, therefore, means being opposed to the law of God, against the law of God. The Roman Catholic Church feared that people would take the doctrine of sola fide, justification by faith alone, as a license for sin. If justification is by faith alone without any works, the layperson is going to understand it simply means that he's saved by grace by faith alone, so he can live however he wants to live. It was critical to the 16th century reformers to answer that charge because they had the same concern. They reminded their friends in the Roman Catholic Church that Paul addresses this question in Romans 6. Luther responded to the charge by explaining that we are justified by faith alone, but not by a faith that is alone. Justification by faith alone, as we have seen, is shorthand for justification by Christ alone and by his righteousness. But justification by faith alone was never intended by God as a license for sin. I know this is lengthy, but this is important. Every time the gospel is preached, the demon of antinomianism knocks at the door and says that if we are justified by faith, then works do not count. And if works do not count, then works do not matter. No work we do will ever contribute to our justification, Sproul writes. In that sense, our works do not count. However, that is not the same thing as saying they do not matter, because we are justified unto good works. We are not justified by our sanctification, but we are justified unto sanctification. The fruit of true faith, the fruit of true justification will always be conformity to the image of God. That's what Paul is beginning to spell out for us. Rome believes that faith is necessary and indispensable to justification. And an Orthodox Roman Catholic can say, yes, I believe justification is by faith, but he must choke to death on the word alone because his communion teaches that justification is by faith plus works. The Roman Catholic formula is faith plus works equals justification. You have to have the works or there is no justification because the works are part of the ground for justification. The Reformation view, the biblical view, is justification plus works equals faith. The works are there, but they are on the other side of the equation. The antinomian formula is justification minus works equals faith, which is the heresy that Paul abhors here at the beginning of Romans 6. Apologies for the lengthy exposition there, but I think that was one of the most important excerpts, I think, so far from R.C. Sproul.
Why?
Because he goes into great detail, but in a very short and pithy way about the key crux of the difference. Why is there this important distinction between Catholics and Protestants? And it's not even, I'm doing it a disservice by calling it a distinction. What is the core friction? And he just spells it out there. Which side of the equation is works on? And of course, he spells out the antinomian position against the law position, which is, what does he say there? It's justification minus works equals faith. That's a heresy, obviously. Mm-hmm. But the key distinction there, Catholic formula, faith plus works, Reformation view, works plus faith, equaling justification.
So this does bring us back then to some of the conversation we had before, but I think from a different place. In that now we're arguing it from a place of which side has the better argument or counter. Before we argued it from which is the more biblical position. Now we're arguing it from the position of what's the better counter to antinomianism and Gnosticism that we can just live however we want. And what Protestants would say to the Catholics is a concern that if I follow the sacramental system, but there's nothing happening in my heart. Okay, if I just perform the sacramental system, but I've never had a true conversion. There's and so therefore I'm taking the Lord's name in vain and doing all kinds of stuff, but I show up for confession and I work the sacraments, and I'm sitting there at Mass, but no change has happened in my heart, that I have created a...
We're talking about works without faith.
Correct. Yes. That those are works without faith, and therefore I'm covered because I'm following the ecclesiastical system. You guys would respond that the sacramental system was created ecclesiastically to answer the question of who actually does have the faith. Okay, so correct that ultimately that's the test against the conscience, the reminder of our own sinfulness. Okay, and that those things are, to follow those things is an expression of faith in and of itself. And so that's where some of the tension here is, on the other side of the equation between the two camps. What is the proper answer to false converts? What's the proper answer to antinomianism? What's the proper answer to Gnosticism? Your turn. Is that a fair... again, we're doing Reader's Digest theology from stuff that people way smarter than us have written, 500 years of works about. Works as in literary works, okay, in this case. So, but that, in a nutshell, that's kind of the debate, right?
It is, and then to test any debate here, it's important that this is it's not just a philosophy, it is a life. Christ is incarnate to the point of all the way, bleeding, dying. Steve, forgive me, I'm just making sure. So how can we who died to sin yet live in it? Scott Hahn says, Paul's primary objective throughout Romans 6 is to stress that God has called us to the pursuit of sanctification and salvation. The Greek verb parapatio, translated as live, although the term literally means walk, since walking is a Hebrew idiom for conducting oneself in relation to God. In Scripture, a person walks either in the way of wickedness or in the way of righteousness. Mm-hmm. Being raised with Jesus means directing all our efforts and choices toward the goal of eternal life. But how is such a moral miracle possible, even granting that baptized Christians have received the forgiveness of sins? Readers will have to wait until Romans 8, and this is where a lot of people, Protestants, early on said, wait till you get there. Okay, well, like I said, even with earlier chapters, we're getting there already. Readers will have to wait until Romans 8.
Can I pause? Put it just for a second.
Yes.
I want to make sure we make perfectly clear, Aaron, Protestants do not disagree with anything that he just said,
nope.
From quoting Scott Hahn, whatsoever, okay? There's the premise that's being discussed here by Todd. We have no disagreement with this. We agree this tension exists. The disagreement comes down to what resolves the tension. Okay, so go ahead and finish.
In terms of getting to Romans 8, where I know where a lot of people go, and Paul leaves a clue here for the full answer. Only twice in his letters does he use the term newness. Once in this verse, 6 chapter 4, so we're bouncing ahead a little bit, but I think it's implied here. And once again in Romans 7:6, where he speaks of serving the Lord, quote, in the newness of the Spirit. Read in conjunction, these two passages show that Christians are empowered by the Spirit to accomplish by grace what is beyond the ability of human nature. The indwelling presence of God is the critical factor that makes newness of life possible for disciples of Jesus. I think this is important because all of us were sprinting ahead in various ways. Remember, we talked very early on, about what the unforgivable sin.
That's the blaspheming of the Holy Spirit.
The blaspheming of the Spirit. And we talked about what that means. Like
to attribute to the demonic realm and to Satan the works of God, for example.
And this applies where the order of things here. Can we turn down, the argument, if you live by faith, you will do works, but can you not do that? We've argued about that. Can you lose your salvation? We're always going to be circling around that for the rest of our conversation here, because if it implied in the story of Ananias and Sapphira, yes, that were they saved or not? Because they ultimately...
They're the couple in the book of Acts that lies to Peter about how much of what they had given to the church and kept some from themselves. And they're cast dead for committing that sin right away. Yes.
We're talking about newness of life. and what in the Spirit, and what blaspheming that does in fact do. So anyways, I think Scott Hahn, it's so funny how often we track in like 9 out of 10 things, and then why you reset that. We don't disagree with the single thing you said. It's always where that fraction of a difference occurs, and we know throughout human history that ends up to the point of fracturing the entire church, bloody wars, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, those fractions can sometimes be very meaningful, which is why some of that stuff happens at times. But I, in this case, because we've argued back and forth about which is the superior view, now that we're attacking, we're each attacking the objective view of can we just abuse God's grace? I think it's very important for my fellow evangelicals to hear you guys' perspective on this objectively, an answer to that question as opposed to just an answer to Protestants, to see that there is a sincere desire to answer this question, and that many of the traditions and things that you guys have that we do not adopt are not all. I would argue not all. If I did, I'd be Catholic. But many of the traditions and sacraments and rituals that you guys adhere to do stem from an origin point of trying to resolve the very tension that Paul articulates here in verse 1 of chapter 6. We can't just go on abusing God's grace. So then what's the answer then? What holds us accountable? What keeps us on the straight and narrow? How do we not fall off the narrow road, right? I mean, and before there was a Protestant Reformation in 1517, these systems existed for a millennia and a half to help Christians navigate those ethical boundaries and quandaries in a fallen world.
And that's a level of understanding and grace for the Catholic Church that, quite frankly, there's a grand difference of opinion, at least within Twitter evangelical Protestantism right now, because you offer a level of grace that is often missing in this conversation.
Well, we're almost out of time here, but my concern is I do think there is a tide of Protestants who act as if no one was a Christian until Luther mounted 95 theses on a wall.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's a very problematic position to take. So, we've had disagreements during these conversations already. We'll have more moving forward, yes. I'm sure. But I also think it's important to understand that when even those you disagree with are coming from a place of sincere introspection and critical thinking, that should be acknowledged. And that's how we come now and reason together, to quote the prophet Isaiah.
Amen.
All right, we'll come back. Let's have our polling reconciliation post-election here next. Have you heard about one of the fastest growing crimes out there? It's called house stealing. It's real. It's happening more and more, especially right now, where we still have this really sluggish real estate market. And even with the electoral victory this week, winter, even in a great economy, isn't like, a season that a lot of people want to move in anyway. So on one hand, your housing values have exploded. On the other hand, people can't afford to buy a house, move out of a house, interest rates are too high, etc. And that means a lot of us are sitting on mountains of equity, and scammers, thieves, would love to come along, forge your signature on a quick claim deed, claim your home is theirs, and then start taking out loans against your investment, against your equity. And that's what our friends at Home Title Lock want to help to try and prevent. With the triple lock protection system, it'll monitor your title 24/7. It alerts you if there's any changes to your title at all, works fast to restore your title with no out-of-pocket cost if fraud does occur. And they don't wait until you're a victim either. They will get to monitoring it right away. In fact, you can get a free 30-day trial and a free title history report to see if you've already been targeted and didn't know when you use the promo code Steve Deace, my full name. Use the promo code Steve Deace at HomeTitleLock.com. That's HomeTitleLock.com. Use the promo code Steve Deace at HomeTitleLock.com. All right, let's reconcile the polling with the post-election results. And in 2020 was the worst year of the modern polling industry. The Real Clear Politics polling average was broken. It's the first time since it started in 2000 that the results were outside the margin of error of the Real Clear Politics polling average, about 3.5 points. And it was well outside that, as a matter of fact. Now, Real Clear Politics recalibrated how they did their polling average for this cycle after the last one. Kind of cut some fat, as they would put it, and maybe added a piece or two of lean meat to try to improve it. So how did it perform in 2024? Let's start with the national RCP average, okay? It is currently off by just inside a 3.5-point margin for error. It is currently off by 3.4 points. It predicted Kamala Harris to win the popular vote by 0.1. Trump is currently ahead by 3.3. Looking at, and there's estimates anywhere from 8 to 15 million votes still need to be counted, particularly in California and other places. Okay. It's very likely that in the end, by the time those votes are counted, Trump's current 3.3 margin in the Electoral College will be cut in half, I would say. More than likely. He's going to win the popular vote. The math for her is not out there overall to not win it. But I don't think it'll be by 3.3 points. My guess is by 1.5 or 2 points he'll win it by. And with that, that would end up then putting the Real Clear Politics polling average well within its margin for error compared to how it performed in 2024. Or I'm sorry, in 2020. So let's start there with you guys' thoughts on that.
Wow. That's the initial thought. I mean, the fact we knew it was maybe a possibility that Trump could win the popular vote. Just taking some of the signals and trends that we'd seen in stride. It's still striking, though, that we're even having these conversations a couple of days after the election. I mean, you look at some of these maps that have been posted with the right red arrow or the left blue arrow. And I mean, this was what we were looking for, like the buy-seller hold submission said yesterday. I'm not sure if we got to that one or not, but this is what we were talking about. This is the red wave that we were expecting 2 years ago.
Todd?
Oh, Trump wave, I know, but
Trump wave, yes.
Numerically,
Numerically,
but this is why this needs to be partnered with your conversation yesterday, Steve. What happened to who? In all 48 or 49 states closed the gap somewhat significantly. But who are the demographics, the kind of people? You just can't do the old school Republican.
I mean, Trump lost New York, Todd, by less than Kamala lost Florida.
So you have got to ask responsible questions about what did they care about. And it might shatter some of your expectations about how to move forward. And if it does, that's good, because moving forward means, connecting the dots in a way that makes sense. If the Republicans go out there and give you stupid lectures that don't apply to just what happened, they're going to fail.
By the way, Arizona.
What at
69%. I got up and I checked. Like first thing when I got up this morning, how many votes Arizona count? Was it 69% when I got up this morning? I just checked again. 69%.
Arrest Katie.
Why are you? You have a higher net worth than Florida, a lot fewer people. Maricopa's one of the wealthiest counties in the country. How is this so hard?
See,
you're almost 48 hours behind Florida. Why are you retarded? What is wrong with you there?
Perfect follow-up to what I just said. This is old school Republicans doing old school Republican things, just inept, clueless.
Is the dry heat of the desert, does that affect time? Does that warp time out there?
Anyway. All right, we're going to look next at how individual pollsters who do daily tracking of the presidential race nationally. We're going to look next at how they did after we tell you about our friends over at Lumen. It's the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And so you go to the app and it'll tell you how many after you breathe into the device. It'll tell you if you're burning fat, burning carbs. It'll even give you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, even stress management. So all you got to do, breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. You can use it as well before and after workouts throughout the day too to keep up on your metabolism, which is your body's engine. And that is how your body determines how to turn the food you eat into fuel or into fat. So that keeps you going and keeps you healthier as well. And Lumen will give you recommendations based on your numbers on how to improve your metabolic health. So If you want to take the next step in improving your metabolic health, go to lumen.me/Steve. Lumen is how it is spelled. Lumen. Lumen.me/Steve. Get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/Steve to get 15% off your purchase. And thanks for Lumen for sponsoring this portion of our polling reconciliation. So how far were the final national polls off? Let's do this in order of worst to best according to the polls included within the Real Clear Politics polling average. All right. I will say overall, the national polls, there were several more polls within the margin for error this time than in 2020. There were only like 2 or 3. All right. Polls that were off the most. Marist was off, as of right now, by 7.3 points. Now, again, that's going to close probably a point and a half by the time we finish counting every last vote here in the next few days and weeks, so keep that in mind. But right now, Marist was off by 7.3 points. Forbes was off by 5.3 points, so you can see there's a drop-off already. Marist uniquely sucks. Fire everybody at Marist polling. They are uniquely bad at this. Or good. Morning Consult, that's Politico. They were also off by 5.3 points. Reuters Ipsos, which was actually good in 2020, off by 5.3 points. CBS News off by 4.3 points. Didn't John Daniel Davidson call for their disbanding on the show earlier today?
I'll allow it.
Yahoo off by 4.3 points. USA Today off by 4.3 points. Those were the polls within the RCP average that were off outside the margin for error. Now here were the rest, currently the best performing national tracking polls of this cycle. Yet again, and I know it gets mocked, and I know it's biased, man. It's biased to Trump, but the numbers are what they are. Rasmussen was only off by 0.3 points. Now, wow, it's going to be off by more than that by the time we get done counting voting, but it's still going to be well within the margin for error. At the most, it'll be off by 2.3 points. That's really good. All right. Wall Street Journal, also off by 0.3 points. So Rasmussen and Wall Street Journal, you're going to ask me where's Trafalgar? They don't do national polling. They only focus on the states. All right. So Rasmussen and Wall Street Journal are the winners. They're going to end up being the most correct polls, final polls of the 2024 election cycle. Fox News, which has sucked as a pollster for years, actually did pretty good this year. They were only off by 1.3. Atlas Intel, which was not included in the previous RCP average, but was included this year based on the way it performed in 2020. It was off by 2.3. Emerson, which you guys know is a poll I like a lot, it was off by 3.3. And it's going to end up being off, it'll be off outside the margin for error probably by the time we get done counting the votes. NBC News off by 3.3 as well. New York Post off by 3.3. New York Times Siena poll, one of the worst in 2020, was only off by 3.3. And then TIP, which stands for, I can't remember what it is. It's like a blog, was off by 3.3. So those were the most accurate pollsters within the RCP average for this cycle.
You know, I had
one more thing. No, all of them. I'll stop there. Go ahead, Eric. I'll stop there.
I had not heard of Atlas Intel until this cycle, and people started parading it around as the most accurate pollster of 2020. And finally, a few weeks ago, I'm like, is this actually true? And yeah, at the national level. And then I don't want to step over. I know you'll get to the states here, but what are they doing over there? Because this is 2 elections in a row where they have done really, really well.
Yeah. They're doing something right. Yeah.
Here's the problem.
Maybe they're doing actual polling. I don't know. Yeah.
The answer to that question, what are they doing over there? It would help if we knew. But then because this is not just a public service and a business, are the people that did it right? Is it proprietary information that they won't tell you because they want to make money? Or do they want to step forward and say, this is why I'm good and you suck, and I'd prefer that. Steve, it's like you always say, like, I'm happy when somebody else takes credit for something I believe because I just want to win. Mm-hmm. This is the problem with polls. Like, I'm happy people were good at it, but we need all of them to be better at it. We really do. It's not just a business thing. This thing is a curse upon the land. It puts people in trances, and that's a problem. And I don't have good answers for how to get better.
Well, and this is an important point too, because here's the thing: even though some of these polls in their final numbers ended up being way more correct than they were in the last cycle, before we got to their final poll, these polls, most of them, except for the Rasmussens and such of the world, published so much straight up, you know what?
Yeah.
That was just clearly never going to happen in a million years. Well, you have to ask yourself, okay, so was it just narrative propaganda? And then the last week, okay, let's retcon it like we
are real science.
Yeah, so that next cycle we can do the same thing all over again. 9 months of complete total agit prop, and then the final poll we pretend like we're taking it seriously again. Do you think the New York Times, when they put out in their final New York Times Siena poll, they put out that advisory that 16 points more of white liberals are responsive to their poll inquiries than Republicans, right? Do you think that just happened in their final poll?
No. Now I'm just angry, man. I'm just angry.
So where was that advisory in March, April, May? By the time we get to March, where Trump is the presumptive nominee, okay? So it's head to head, Trump Biden, and then after July, it's Trump Kamala. Why didn't they give us that advisory with every damn poll they ran from March until November? Why'd they wait to the very last one? Think that just suddenly happened? No, it did not. No, it did not. Well, Steve, you said before that they don't take their credibility seriously. They don't. This was positioning themselves to go back to run the same scam they did before. 9-10 months of complete push polling, narrative casting, masquerading as polls. And then at the end, when they can tell it's not going to go their way, let's pretend like we had this thing right all along so we can just go back to gaslighting you again in the very next cycle the same way. It's a pattern.
We need to shoot that into the sun.
All right, here's what we need to shoot out to many mailboxes because still too many people voted the wrong way in this election. So even though it's not a voter guide anymore, there's a lot of people that still need to be reading the U.S. Constitution based on these results. Can I get a witness on that?
Amen.
So if you want to get a free copy of a handheld Constitution from our friends over at Hillsdale, they're still handing those out right now. Go to daceforhillsdale.com, F-O-R, daceforhillsdale.com, whether you want one. I can't think of a better gift for Aunt Petunia this Thanksgiving. When she shows up loaded for bear with a year's worth of memorized lower thirds and chirons from the televised lunatic asylum known as MSNBC, you can just say, Merry Christmas early and hand her that pocket-filled Constitution from our friends at Hillsdale. I'm sure she'll appreciate that, and so will the rest of your family. All right, so go to daceforhillsdale.com. Get your pocket Constitution today. They'll ship it to you for free. Just fill out a simple form for you or that special Aunt Petunia in your life. All right, daceforhillsdale.com, and it's free for everybody, but cat ladies get it even extra free from our friends at Hillsdale at daceforhillsdale.com. All right, let's look at the state numbers. All right, so how far off were final battleground state polls in the RCP average? All right, let's do these in alphabetical order. Arizona, they said Trump was going to win by 2.8. He is currently ahead by 5.5. In Georgia, they said Trump would win by 1.3. It's currently Trump 2.2. In Michigan, Harris 0.5. It's currently Trump 1.5. In Nevada, Trump 0.6. It's currently Trump 3.8. In North Carolina, they said 1.2 for Trump. Trump currently leads by 3.3. It said in Pennsylvania, Trump by 0.4. He's currently up 1.9. And then in Wisconsin, they said Harris by 0.4. Trump is currently leading there 0.8. None of the RCP battleground state averages, none of them overestimated Trump's support, none of them. And in the last two cycles, the only time one of them has was Georgia in 2020 overestimated Trump's support. So in the last two presidential cycles with Donald Trump, only out of Georgia in 2020 is the only time in any battleground state his support's been overestimated, the only time. So again, Trump is underpolled even by compilation averages of polling. However, the Trump was undersampled this time by only 1.6 points, which is that's the average in these battleground states, which is definitely within an acceptable margin for error, even though the trend line of underpolling him remains, which is why Rasmussen, with their pro-Trump bias, is so accurate. They balance out the anti-Trump bias that's everywhere else.
This is like social media algorithms, Steve, when you're saying it's amazing how the accidents only go one way when they come back and say, oh, we're sorry. We didn't. Again, I don't know what the answer to this is. I mean, it's almost as if they do their results. They look at what their margin of error is, and they all push their results in the same direction of the margin of error just to be barely on that side, whatever it is, 3 or 4 points, because that's kind of what you're describing here. I don't know. I'm just, you know what I think about polling already. It's like instant replay. It's not helpful to us. It really isn't in the end.
I've said this about Bernie Sanders multiple times, that his diagnosis of problems was correct, but his solution was always more government when he said government was the problem in the first place. So I don't want to pull a Bernie Sanders here, but don't they have laws in places like France and in Great Britain? This is for exit polling. They're not allowed to publicly release exit polling until polls are closed. Right.
They don't have mail-in voting in those places either.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So something has got to reform here when it comes to the way our elections are done and the polling industry, because like Todd said, it's not actually, we're not doing science here. We're doing scientism. We're conjuring narratives. That's just wrong. It's unhealthy.
Amen. All right, that will do it for today's show. We're going to stick around and do overtime with my oldest daughter, Anastasia, 3 non-political questions. We'll be back tomorrow with the Deace group for the rest of you as well. Hope to see you then. Until then, Romans 8:28.